I'm Jacob Smith. This is for the Arduino Class Generator Spark project. We've got Tim Hebert here. Tim, hi. Can you introduce yourself and your role at Brandeis?
Sure. So I am Tim Hebert. I'm Embedded Systems and Robotics Specialist at Brandeis, and I work in the Research Technology Innovation Group, specifically running the Automation Lab.
Thanks, Tim. Can you tell us how you use Arduino in your role at Brandeis?
Sure. So in the Automation Lab, one of our primary tools that we use for people to be able to manipulate objects is an Arduino. So that is the primary microcontroller that's used for people to gather sensor data information, do something with that sensor data information, and then output it in either the form of movement or light display, that kind of stuff.
Great, thanks. And what is your workflow for Arduino programming? How do you have a certain editor that you like to use? Who in the staff likes to write programs, and how do you share those programs with other people?
Sure. So currently we use the Arduino built-in IDE, the default IDE. That's not a required tool, but it's the default, and it has a lot of tools and widgets built into it to assist with a bunch of the Arduino programming stuff, so we primarily use that. As far as sharing code and doing revisioning and things like that, probably GitHub is our most commonly used tool, or maybe our second most commonly used tool, right behind people just renaming folders version 1, version 2, and kind of throwing it in a lump on a computer somewhere. Yeah, and emailing to share, I guess.
Thanks. And do you have anybody who's programming with Arduino who doesn't know a lot about computer science or engineering principles?
Yeah, I would argue probably a majority of our clientele are not super comfortable, at least initially, with programming of any kind, and don't have a great understanding initially coming into it of electronics and things like that, and that's why they're in the room, actually.
Great, thanks. And is there anything that's annoying or frustrating about programming with Arduinos?
Programming with Arduinos is not terrifically intuitive generally. Embedded systems programming in general is not the same as programming on a desktop. The reasoning is a lot of times in desktop land, you have so much extra space, you've got so much extra power, that for the very large majority of programs, your priority is readability, usability, that kind of stuff. It's to make the life of the programmer easier, and it's using novel approaches to programming, that kind of stuff. Whereas the priority a lot of times for embedded system stuff, because you're dealing with devices that have very little memory, very little speed, very little capacity, efficiency and size is your number one concern. So a lot of times your programming is ugly. It's not very readable. It's not laid out very well. And yeah, that ends up being the priority. So it's a little tough. It's super tough for computer science people to wrap their mind around it, and it's a weird entry point for non-computer science people to enter into the land of computer science.
Great, thanks. So now I want to introduce the Arduino class generator. We have it pulled up on here. If you scroll down to that animation. So this animation shows what the generator does, which is automatically create Arduino libraries. You see there's an example sketch, which is what everyone uses in Arduino, to make a Morse code blink on the chip, and this generates a class file, example files, it generates comments, and it also enables you to create standards for organizations. You can define exactly how you want your code to be written. You're already familiar with the Arduino class generator, but so could you tell me about how it's been used in the Automation Lab already and what you're excited about with it going forward?
Sure. So generally, the programming that happens in the lab is oftentimes done by researchers who are some sort of subject matter expert in a particular field, or students who are getting started with this stuff and don't have a good hold on standard programming practice or software engineering practices, things like that. Also, if we go the other direction of this other side, the kind of cool thing about Arduino, the important thing about Arduino really is the community, the existence of libraries and shared code and the open source mentality, this kind of hacker idea of share everything and spread it and make it so that it's easy for other people to get started and do cool stuff with this technology, is really the cool part of this. It's the rest of it is maybe novel, but it's not. That's not what the selling point is. So the idea of having a class generator so that you can have people who are not experts in software engineering practices able to take their code that they got to work and then put it in the format that is useful for somebody else to be able to implement things that you have figured out. That's kind of neat, and it really fits directly in with the idea or the mindset, like the mentality of Arduino generally, the Arduino like open hardware idea. It really, I think it plays well into the general Arduino idea.
Great, thanks, Tim. So I've got a couple background questions.
Sure.
Do you know of anything else that exists that's like this?
I know of some pieces of code that will do prettifying of your code. They'll make your spacing nice. They'll make your comments consistent. They'll double check for errors or a better way to do things. There are some chunks of code that will do things that they'll look for errors or warnings and then look them up for you. So there's some things that have similar ideas, but I don't know of any personally that will build a library out of like chunk O code. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Tim. Can you tell me how electronic software like this is paid for at a college? Would you the person who's in charge of purchasing this, or would it be someone at the library? Or how does like the institutional part of this work?
Sure. So our department has our own separate budget line. So we are funded under the library, and we have a little bit of autonomy when it comes to certain pieces of software if they're necessary for use by different groups or have demand from different groups, things like that. So yes, I think in this particular scenario, either myself or Ian would probably make the call on purchasing a tool like this.
Great, thanks. And then the one more question is, if your department was considering purchasing this tool as a service, which would probably be free to use, and then paying for consulting and having someone help users make the best libraries they could and teach them how the software works, what would they be looking for to make that purchase? What would you want?
I mean, honestly, that business model generally makes the most sense to me. A lot of your larger scale software corporations, like Adobe, Microsoft, etc., follow that kind of a business model where the software is free. They want to get into as many hands as they possibly can, but the hand holding and the customer support and stuff is what you're paying for as far as service and stuff goes. You're asking me what particular feature sets and things I would want?
Right. Yes. How would you, like, what are some things that would get you to really want to have this in the department?
Sure. I think some sort of training, either hands-on or even just a video series worth of training on how you'd use the tool, what kind of limitations the tool actually has, so that people can go into that as an understanding. And then the other direction is a lot of this is really trying to showcase certain software engineering styles and norms to people who are not from that kind of a background and don't have all of that jargon. So if you can really make sure that you understand your target audience as being these people who are extremely proficient in some other task and is using this as a tool to facilitate that other task as opposed to using it because they love software. If you know your audience in that regard and you can build tutorials and guides and things like that targeted at those kinds of people, would want in my lab.
Great, thanks. Last question. Is there anything else you want to talk about with this topic, or do these questions cover your opinions about this software and the existing state of Arduino at Brandeis?
A little on the spot for that. Yeah, I mean, you covered more than I anticipated with the questions. Cool. Yeah, no, I think it makes a lot of sense. There's definitely some implications of how people add a library to a file, where that data ends up being stored such that it is actually shareable, right? Because you can make a library, but if you don't publish the library, if you don't have it downloadable somewhere, if you don't have it hosted, then it's not terrifically useful. So the whole kind of workflow is pretty important, and this might just be a part of that workflow. So how you plan on getting from all the way from point A to point B and all the mid-ground, what your plan is for that, I think is going to be important. But other than that, I think you covered everything.
Great. Thanks, Tim.